Hi, everyone. Welcome to this very timely conversation, and we are so pleased to have you all join us today. My name is Mary Stata. I am Mercy Corps' Chief Development Officer, and I am joined by two colleagues who I will introduce in just a moment. But before we dive in, I wanted to share just a little bit more about Mercy Corps for some of you who may be less familiar with us. We are a global team of 5,600 humanitarians working side by side with people experiencing poverty, disaster, and violent conflict, and the acute impacts of climate change in over 40 countries. Mercy Corps brings a comprehensive approach to every challenge that we encounter. We address problems from many different angles. We go beyond emergency aid as well. We partner with local governments, with companies, with social entrepreneurs, and with the people, most importantly, themselves who are living in the communities who are experiencing these challenges. We need to make bold solutions happen that can make lasting change possible. I would be remiss if I did not also reflect on the events over this past weekend, which again really do underscore the necessity of Mercy Corps' mission in today's world. The devastating earthquake that hit Herat, Afghanistan, it was a 6.3 magnitude earthquake that has resulted in thousands of casualties and a tremendous amount of destruction in a very remote part of Afghanistan where Mercy Corps has already has existing programming. And also, obviously, as the news has been consumed with the news that's emerged in Israel and in Palestine, we are deeply concerned about the escalation of violence in both Israel and in Gaza. And we anticipate really devastating consequences humanitarian-wise in the coming days. And we are already concerned about the mounting civilian casualties and also the potential obstruction of vital channels of humanitarian aid. Mercy Corps is working to respond to the humanitarian needs in the days to come. I do want to introduce my two wonderful colleagues who I'm joined with today, Sonal Shinde and Angelique Alasmar. Sonal is a longstanding team member at Mercy Corps. She is Mercy Corps' emergency response lead within our humanitarian leadership and response team. Sonal is responsible for the leadership of Mercy Corps operations in a specific emergency response and supervises response teams. Sonal first joined Mercy Corps to work in Sudan in 2005 as part of the large humanitarian response to the crisis in Darfur. Since then, she has worked in crises such as the Indian Ocean tsunami, aftermath in Sri Lanka, in Ethiopia, the Haiti earthquake, the war in Libya, just to name a few. Sonal is clearly a very seasoned humanitarian within Mercy Corps, and I'm so glad that we are able to hear from her experience and her wisdom and expertise today. I'm also pleased to introduce Angelique Alasmar, who joined Mercy Corps in 2020 as a regional community accountability advisor. And this is a part of our conversation today that I'm really excited to dig in more and for you all to learn more about Angelique's work. She provides technical support to our community accountability team members in Asia and Europe. And this is a really crucial role in humanitarian response, as you will hear more about today. Angelique works to increase community engagement and acceptance of programs, as well as to enhance the program quality by ensuring that we are responding to the evolving needs of communities, including those most marginalized and vulnerable within them. So without further ado, I am going to dive into our conversation. We have a full agenda for you all. We are also going to save plenty of time for audience Q&A. So please submit your questions during the discussion through the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'm going to dive right in to Sonal posing a question to you first. And I would love for you just to share a little bit more about Mercy Corps' humanitarian response and how we approach these different crises.
Thank you, Mary, and good to be here with everybody. Before I dive into the Mercy Corps humanitarian approach, I want to kind of highlight Mercy Corps' 10-year strategy, the pathway to possibility within which the humanitarian approach sits. And why this is important is this organization is always focused on not just the short-term needs of people, but also the longer-term impact of what we do in terms of our program in communities. So the pathway to possibility particularly reflects Mercy Corps' ambition to not just meet basic needs of communities which are affected by conflict or climate change, but also to achieve that long-lasting transformational change at scale. And within that sits a humanitarian approach which focuses on meeting immediate needs of communities, but creating conditions of resilience of communities. So what does that mean essentially? Is that while we are doing the basic services, service delivery of food, water, or other non-food item, etc., support to communities, we are looking at the activities in a way that kind of anchor us in the community to do better programming in the future, reach more participants, which may not be who may not be impacted by the disaster right away, but kind of because of the context they are in are already vulnerable, and we may be able to help them in the future with our early recovery programs. The three important things within the humanitarian approach are that we center participants, we contextualize our programs, we make sure that we do not copy paste something that we have done in X region to Y region, because every situation is different, even though it may be a very familiar crisis. So for instance, a flood or an earthquake, every community responds differently to these crises. The second is that we try to build partnerships because we know that we cannot go at it alone ever. We have to work with local communities, local governments, and also local and international organizations, whether they are non-government, whether they are within the private sector or within the public sector. So those partnerships are encouraged, and some of them are built before the crisis happens too, with our presence. And if we are new to an area, then we try to encourage those connections right away. And the third thing that we do, which is very important, is to leverage our voice. We are an international organization, Mercy Corps, and we want to raise our voice for contexts which have high needs and a shrinking humanitarian space, whether it is related to access, humanitarian access, access of humanitarians to the communities in need, whether it is the protection of civilians, or whether it is providing a timely and effective response, for instance, in locations where governments may not let organizations access the communities. So I'll stop here and I can expand more as we go along.
Thank you, Sonal, for that introduction. That was really helpful. And obviously for you, who you have experienced so many, and you've been part of so many different humanitarian responses in a range of different types of crises, whether they be like describing natural disasters or also situations that result from violent conflict. And wow, how do you see Mercy Corps differentiating itself in these responses? And it's, of course, incredibly important for us to be coordinating with peer organizations, and we need many different organizations responding to these crises, given the scale of them. How do you see our role as being distinct, or as really being Mercy Corps, a Mercy Corps role in these really large
Well, my answer may be slightly biased because I've worked with this organization for a long time. So I feel like we do the best response because we have really committed team members and we are really spread across many countries. So at this point of time, whether our entry was because of a natural disaster or because of a large development program, we have footprints in many countries. And we have national and local team members who are working in those responses together with us. I think leveraging the information from our local teams, our connections with the communities, the fact that we use acceptance as a strategy for entering a particular community, that helps us quite a bit in kind of tailoring our response, which is contextualized to the needs of the populations. And the other thing that I also see of value is that we approach programming in a multi-sectoral way. What that means is that we do not just do health, or we don't do health, but we don't do one sector programming at all. We try to overlay our programs, especially in the humanitarian response, by providing water and sanitation services, food security. We may overlay food security with some nutrition. We have integrated protection programming that I'm sure Angelique will speak a little more about. So those are the kind of layers that we do, that we don't kind of put ourselves in a box where we're only doing one kind of service. We try to cover as many services as possible within the communities. The other thing that is happening more in more recent times, and I've seen that example in countries like Nigeria, is even for humanitarian programs, we go together with other international organizations and local organizations, which is a consortium approach, as they say. And that kind of builds on skills and expertise of various organizations to respond to one disaster. And it's a formally accepted mechanism within Mercy Corps, and that donors try to promote to maximize value for money when you are multiple organizations responding to the same disaster under the same framework. So that unifies our tools, our approaches, and we don't confuse the communities by going as, Mercy Corps and then other organizations bilaterally. So that is also one of the distinctives that I've seen of Mercy Corps. So the underlying bit is our teams and our footprint in the communities, and they really, really know the context pretty well.
And yeah, I have to say there really is no substitution for meeting our incredible team members when they are doing their work, and it's endlessly inspiring to me, and just really incredible to see their commitment and their expertise at play. But Angelique and Sonal already started to touch on some of this around the importance of centering communities in our response. And so how do you see Mercy Corps really responding to these crises in a way that centers community needs? And, as Sonal said, like not copying and pasting responses just because we've responded to a flood before, but how do you see us like really tailoring our response to the different communities and the dynamics within those communities?
Thank you so much, Mary, for your question. And I'm gonna maybe focus on the community accountability side of the work that we do in Mercy Corps. So Mercy Corps follows a human-centered approach in its, community accountability. So we really look into, as you said, Mary, in your question, centering the voices of the communities we serve in order to, let's say, identify the needs and the preferences of the communities and basically, address them throughout the program lifecycle. So as you see, for example, from the photos during my last visit to Indonesia, we conduct what we call community consultation / community engagement, where we reach out to community leaders or representatives of the communities, where they represent different, let's say, population groups, women, men, elderlies in some cases, and it depends on the context itself. So we look into reaching out to different population groups. We listen to their voices, and we ensure that we engage with them early on to make sure that their voices are heard, not only in the design, honestly, phase, but throughout the program life cycle. So we keep monitoring our own program, over time. And basically in the photo, this shows the first community consultation that we conducted, but we have another one. So it depends pretty much on the structure of the community that we have. This is, for example, a minority group in a certain village. So when we reach out, as Sonal mentioned, we engage with our local local staff members who are leading on the session, speaking the same language, of course, and ensuring that we're basically on the same page as our own, community representatives and community leaders. And then we work together, we partner with them early on to ensure that we identify the needs and preferences. And then basically we work on establishing what we call community accountability reporting mechanisms, or what is widely known in the sector, feedback and complaints response mechanism that is appropriate for that community. So here in that photo, we, after finishing the meeting, they came up with a different name that is not used in Mercy Corps, that is associated with their own, let's say, preferences. So to sum up, we basically ensure that we look into the context. We partner with our local team members who know the context very well, and basically reach out to the community, center their voices, and collect all the results from different community consultations to inform program design, and ensure that we listen to the voices throughout the program lifecycle. And this is what we do, strongly in any kind of emergency response.
Thank you, Angelique, and it's wonderful to see these images that really bring to life what you're describing and how we are really having these important conversations in person, and also the importance of our team members reflecting the context where we work themselves, and understanding all of the nuances and really important cultural linguistic considerations. Um, Another part of our response, though, is always really centered around partnerships and local partners. So can you talk a little bit more about how you see us engaging with local partners in our emergency response work?
Sure, Mary. I'm gonna also maybe refer to our 10-year strategy, the pathway to possibility, where we have a very important commitment. It's called locally led. So it shows our commitment as Mercy Corps to, as you said, like Mary, to partner with local entities, regardless of the size, the expertise, the technical capacity. So I'm gonna also give an example from Ukraine response. When we first started in February 2022, I remember the program performance and quality team, that what we call in Mercy Corps PAC team, rushed in to provide technical support to the team over there to ensure that we design the program based on the needs on the ground. And then on the community accountability side, of course, we're working through implementing different kinds of implementing partners. So on community accountability, we didn't actually look into the size and the capacity of the partners, and even the duration, let's say, of the agreement or the contract that we're going to have with partners. But we place a strong emphasis on building the capacity of the local partners that we have to ensure that we have a sustainable approach to working with partners. And of course, a shout out to our amazing CARM team over there, who used a very friendly approach early on by engaging with local partners, going there, spending hours and hours, and of course, using the local language makes a huge difference. And partnering with them early on, and identifying, let's say, what exists, and working on what actually exists to build on what we call in Mercy Corps independent community accountability reporting mechanisms. And a lot of partners now have independent mechanisms regardless of our own agreement with them. So which strengthen their own capacity and helps them get even, let's say, more partnerships with other INGOs and other UN agencies. At the end of the day, Mercy Corps is working to ensure that, this is our legacy. And I'm sorry, again, I'm gonna be also biased here. This is our legacy, to ensure that we're leaving something behind, and we're not just even in emergency response, we're conducting some kind of a temporary, or we're following a temporary approach on our emergency response, but we always look for long-term solutions, and follow a more of a sustainable approach to our own operations and programs.
Thank you. Yeah, what I love hearing you describe just the importance, I think, also of us being really self-aware of the role that Mercy Corps plays in these contexts, and the power that we can represent as a large global organization, and the importance of really establishing these clear feedback opportunities for communities to tell us about how our presence and our work is really affecting where they live and their families and their local communities. So thank you for sharing more about that. And over, just even over the past year, there have been so many really complex crises in the world, and obviously the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, the emergence of, or I should say, renewed violence in many ways in Sudan. There also have been other crises that may not have been getting as much international attention, like the ongoing drought in the Horn of Africa, which has led to a really historic hunger crisis. And so I'd love for both of you actually to really just give us some more some more reflections on how you've seen Mercy Corps responding to these crises, including, again, what we aren't necessarily seeing on the front page of the New York Times. Because with also the accelerating impact of climate change, we know that there are going to be so many more crises that are humanitarian around the world in the years to come that maybe aren't going to be in places that get a lot of international attention. So would love to, yes, hear you both reflect on how you've been seeing Mercy Corps respond to these crises, including what we may not get through the news.
I can go first, if that's the case. One of the key things that I feel is important to note is whatever, I mean, across the world, you may now, we started the conversation with speaking of Gaza and of Afghanistan, because the newest and the latest crisis kind of stays on top of people's, radar, media attention, etc. I am calling in from Nigeria. I live in Nigeria, and across Africa over the last 6 months, we've seen many coups d'etats in many countries, and that has impacted many populations. Some of them are well known, like you mentioned, Sudan, Mary. And then the impact of these crises on the region, specifically, what we are seeing now is no crisis is isolated within the country that it emerges. Like for the Gaza instance, we are seeing some impact around Lebanon, and we will see more sort of a geopolitical fallout of the very localized situation. Similarly, with the Sudan situation, we saw a spillover of refugees from Sudan into Chad, into CAR. We work in Central African Republic. This is one of like the smallest countries in Africa. It sits at this, what you call a crossroads of ethnic and linguistic groups, and it's right in the center of the African continent. There are only 5.8 million or 6 million people there. And then when they start receiving refugees from another country, it causes a lot of stress and tension within the existing dynamics. Mercy Corps is responding to the refugees who've come into CAR from Sudan. That crisis started towards the mid of this year. Subsequently, there was also fighting and conflict in Chad, and then CAR saw more refugees coming in from Chad, and Mercy Corps is responding not just to the issues which we are facing in CAR, but also to the problem that is spilling over from the region. The key thing to note is that both these responses, whether it is to the Sudanese refugees in CAR or the Chadian refugees in CAR, has been done through private unrestricted funding, which means the funding that people on this call are perhaps giving to Mercy Corps. Because these crises are so below the radar, it is very difficult to elicit funding from traditional big donors. And we still need to, because we are working in those communities, and we cannot ignore the needs of the refugees in the communities while we work with larger response programs from bilateral donors. It will cause more conflicts and more issues in already ticking time bomb kind of situation. So our work in these kind of places is primarily led by, and to go back a few years, even the large response that we did in Syria was also started with unrestricted private funding, which is individual donors giving to Mercy Corps. And you will not, I mean, in my experience, when I started my job with Mercy Corps in 2005, I started with a psychosocial support program, which was a small program within the large humanitarian response, also funded by private institutional donors. So there is a lot of value I see in kind of using collaborative, funding, where you have the private funding to start responses which seem niche but very, very important, so that the development goals are not, or the other programs are not derailed. I'm sorry, this is electricity in Nigeria, so I hope you can still hear me. So that's the value I see. The other conflict that I can also talk about is the conflict in Armenia, Azerbaijan border, the Nagorno-Karabakh, which is also something that is completely outside the radar of people, because this conflict started, as far as I remember, in 1988. It's one of the oldest conflict in the Soviet Eurasia region, and only now it's coming on some people's radar because it's one of the larger displacement in that region. We work in Georgia on development programs, and we work in Armenia through partners, which Angelique was talking about, and we were talking about locally led and kind of working through partnerships. And we are now working together with a partner using private funding, unrestricted funding, to respond to the refugees or the displaced Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh who've gone back to Armenia. And one more thing to point is that these conflicts are not in isolation. These people have been affected with this conflict for the last generations, and they're extremely, extremely tired. So one cannot look at these events in isolation. They have to be looked at in historical context, in terms of they've already run to the end of their coping, and now they will probably not end up. This is not the first time that they've been displaced, and perhaps not the last time they'll be displaced. So this all sits within a sort of a larger framework of a historical conflict, though it looks like an individual event that has been triggered by a certain situation a month ago or a few weeks ago. So it's very important to know that there will be many conflicts like this, many issues like this, whether it is a flood in a particular country or an earthquake, but this will all sit on top of existing issues which exacerbate the situation for the communities that we work with.
Thank you, Sanal. Angelique, do you have any other comments on some of these recent crises?
Sure, Mary, thank you so much. So I'm gonna maybe look into it from a different perspective. Thank you so much, Sonal, for the background. Technically speaking, what we do in these types of, let's say emergencies is we, again, like I'm gonna refer to our P2P or pathway to possibility. And like in the second commitment around what we call safe, diverse, and inclusive, yeah, we follow this approach when we work with designing programs, especially in emergency situations, where we want to make sure that we have safe programming in place. And basically, when we talk about safe programming, we're talking about including or integrating all of these different components or work streams that we have in Mercy Corps. Community accountability reporting mechanism, safeguarding, protection, all the gender considerations, or what we call JASI. So when we start early on with the need assessment, for example, we add another component to it, what we call JASI analysis, or gender equality and social inclusion, just to make sure that we're looking into all of these different, power dynamic, gender considerations, and to make sure that we're designing programs that provide opportunity for all types of population that we serve, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized. And when it comes to other types of, let's say, needs assessment or the assessment that we need, that we do in the communities, we also in certain situations conduct what we call conflict sensitivity. So we follow different approaches. We combine results from different, let's say, types of exercises. And there is we collate all of these results that inform the program design. And afterwards, we collaborate together, CARM, safeguarding, protection, JASI, and what we call in Mercy Corps GDI, or gender diversity and inclusion, to make sure that we're informing, let's say, what we call the work planning that the program team or the program managers have in place. And we work also on a final, let's say, thing, which is, if we want to have safe programming in place, we want to make sure that we have also safe working places where our team members are representatives also of the communities that we serve. We just saw in the first question about community consultation, and our team members being a representative of that community. They can speak the local language, they understand exactly the way to approach the community. So again, like to sum up, we follow different approaches, combining all of these different work streams together to make sure that we follow the commitment on safe, diverse, and inclusive workplaces and programming. Over to you, Marie.
Thank you, Angelique. Yes, we're clearly really busy at Mercy Corps responding to all of these multiple crises. And it's also I think we've been talking about some of the things that we do really well and that we really see as like distinctives for us. But obviously these are really challenging contexts, which we've also been discussing. And so what do you both see as some of just the really big challenges for us as an organization in responding to this diverse range of humanitarian crises?
Maybe first jump in, and then I'll pass it over to Sanal. I'm gonna start off by of course, I think we all agree on accessibility or reaching out to the most marginalized or the most vulnerable population is an issue, especially in emergency situations where safety could play a key factor in reaching out to the most marginalized. And in addition, to that, if we don't have the means, the financial means to, after we reach out to them and we partner, let's say, for example, with local entities that have access, if we don't have the financial means to support those most at risk, we wouldn't be able, honestly, to include them. And again, talking about safe programming and inclusion, we wouldn't be able, unfortunately, to include them. So this is a very, very big challenge. And I'm gonna maybe and just borrow some of the of the ideas that Sanal just shared about unrestricted funding. Unless we have this kind of unless we have the resources, basically, to respond to the most marginalized and the most vulnerable, we won't be able, honestly, to reach out to them, because the typical kinds of programming usually looks at the majority of the population. Because again, as you said also, Marie, earlier, let's admit that we don't have all the means in the world to respond to to emergency responses as the size of Syria and other emergencies. So this could be one of the challenges. The other one would be around collaboration and coordination. So for example, even if we're succeeding in doing something, unless we're partnering with other local entities, with other international organizations, and we're sitting there in cluster meetings and coordination meetings, we wouldn't be able to, we would run the risk of duplication of efforts and waste of resources. So basically, we need to look into it, to again keep continuing these kind of dialogue with other organizations and establishing those strong partnerships with others, because if we wouldn't be able to cover, at least once we establish these strong relationships, we'll be able to refer cases and partner together with other entities to respond to the most marginalized and most vulnerable. I'm gonna give the floor to Sanal to maybe add some points there. Over to you, Sanal.
Yeah, I think important points on coordination, particularly because, again, if we start working in isolation, we will not have the reach or the ability to do good work, because there is not just stuff to share with other organizations, but also to learn from them. Uh, One of the key challenges that we are seeing, and I think there are these bits that may need to be introduced here, where we talk about acute crisis, we talk about slow onset disasters, we talk about chronic crises, and then we talk about complex environments. And nowadays, there is not much difference in any of them. All of this sort of comes together in certain countries where you may have a conflict going on for the last 5 years, and then you see a climate related disaster that is happening in the same area, which the impact of which is multifold because of the kind of complex situation these communities are already in. So one of the things for us as humanitarians and as emergency response team that we keep in mind is that adverse weather events because of global warming are increasing across the board. When we compare between the last couple of years and now 2022 with the El Nino year, we are going to see more floods, uh, earthquakes, which we have not seen. The kind of repetition of earthquakes also is also something that we have to keep in mind. The average duration of an acute event is also longer. So earlier, when we were doing tsunami response, earthquake response, we could see sort of a wind down of those programs within the first year in terms of the life-saving stage, the second and third year going towards early recovery. By third year, you could say the earthquake response programs were done, and then you're moving to other important things in the communities. But this is not the case anymore. We are seeing that we would be responding to the event is the earthquake, but we'll be responding to the needs of the communities much longer, and you will see Mercy Corps being in those communities much longer than what we had anticipated. The reason to enter was perhaps this acute event, or the reason to expand our program was perhaps this acute event if we are already there. But then it doesn't finish right there. I have to acknowledge that funding has increased for humanitarian or for NGOs in the last 10 years. People are a lot more aware, giving more money, but that doesn't mean that the needs have been covered. As the funding has increased, the costs of doing business also has increased. And that is where we're talking about, working on a chronic disaster, chronic situation in a complex environment, which needs, several layers of safety and security related conversations, several layers of access negotiation conversations. We are also trying to be more efficient with our responses using technology within the response, which is not cheap, but it still kind of makes our response a lot more efficient and aid reaching participants faster by using this technology. That is the whole point of it. So I think while the funding has increased, the costs have increased, and the populations and needs have increased. There is a big gap, even within the UN funding appeals right now. There is at least a 40% gap between the needs that are projected by UN humanitarian response plans and the gaps that are, and the funding that is available. I do not think very, very few appeals are 100% funded. And it's the same with Mercy Corps. We can list out the needs of the communities that we work with, in long form, while we are still raising money for those needs. And because the money doesn't come in time, sometimes the situation kind of complicates itself multifold. Like I was giving you the example of CAR, if we don't respond to the new situation, the displacement from the conflict related to displacement from another country can create a conflict in this new country that they have gone into. So those are a few challenges that I think humanitarians are facing these days.
Thank you both. We're about to switch into our final question before audience Q&A. So for those of you listening, if there are questions that have been emerging in your mind, please feel free to drop them in the chat function, and we'll definitely have some time to dig into those in a moment. But just to wrap up with you both at this stage, we've been talking about, obviously, well, both of you have experience in a range of different crises over your seasoned humanitarians. And what keeps you motivated personally? I mean, this work is hard, and it can be emotionally really distressing and draining and stressful. What keeps you motivated? What gets you up in the morning to really be dedicating your career to these really important issues?
Should I go first? I think I mean I have thought about this question before, and one new thought that came this morning, because I just had a few conversations with team members here, is that we really work for a great organization. I have been with Mercy Corps for 18 years. I have found myself in various situations, different countries, different contexts. And I felt that the colleagues that I've met have been, sort of the motivator for me to not just treat this as a job, but also treat it as a mission, which kind of satisfies me to a level which is cannot be explained. Sometimes you cannot explain to family members why do you do this, etc. And to bring back to that initial part where we were talking about our team members specifically, and Angelique may be able to expand on that because she is from a country which is affected by a lot of conflict, and I have worked as a national team member back in my home country in India. I know the value that my colleagues bring. They are in really difficult situations when they are affected by the conflict. They are living in IDP camps and they come to work every morning. And there is no excuse for me to give to say that I am not motivated. There is no more motivation that the office is open, people are there before me, and they are, quite engaged in what they want to do next. Uh, there is a protection of civilian area. It's called a POC in South Sudan called Bentu. Now, this was created by the UN military, the UN basically, Security Council, to have displaced populations to be under some sort of security of the UN police. It's being now formalized into being a camp versus protection of civilian area. But I worked there when I was working in Sudan in 2016. And many of these people who have been displaced from the northern part of the South Sudan, sorry, northern part of South Sudan unity state are living in those locations. They have sent their families, perhaps after being displaced for 10 years, to the neighboring countries. Again, like we talked about, secondary displacements. They're not with their children, are in hostels, living with families or living overseas, and they are working there. The situation in those camps is that because these camps are supposed to be temporary, though they have been there for 10, 15 years, there are only temporary shelters. Most of our team members live there in temporary shelters where aid is given by organizations like Mercy Corps. They are part of they are aid recipients too, but they're also the ones who are providing aid to the people in the camps. 100,000 in Bentu camp, basically. There is no electricity in their individual shelters, except if they had a solar panel or something. The heat in South Sudan gets to 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. I don't know what is the comparison, 100 degrees Fahrenheit in your it is an impossible situation, but they turn up every day, and then they go to the field which is muddy and waterlogged, and they have to push the car so many times. I cannot tell you if there is any more motivation than that. You just have to see the faces of the people that you work with, and then the people that you are working for.
It's getting a bit emotional because, like, with all the stories that you shared, Sonal, and I want to, control myself not to cry because, again, yeah, I'm going to build up on what you said. We're coming, I think both of us from places where we've been through this, we've been through years and years of war. And when you yourself face all of these, let's say, horrible, terrifying moments, and see all the casualties next to you, and like as part of your community, and when you get the chance and the opportunity to work in an organization that is responding and trying to alleviate suffering, what more motivation could you ask for? I mean, yes, it is tiring, and we run the risk of burnout, of course, because sometimes, I mean, we work, I don't know, maybe 16, 18 hours. It depends on the emergency situation. But again, when you think of, so you're in, as Sonal mentioned, you're in a safe, for example, place. You're at least, have the proper living condition. What, I mean, like, what else do you need in order to support those who are living in harsh, situations, whether it was cold, electricity cut, and now we're seeing all over the places, with lack of resources and proper living conditions. And you see our local team members getting up in the morning, even before you, like, and trying to respond. So the least that we can do, Marie, is basically to provide them with the technical support that they need to continue their own humanitarian response. Because at the end of the day, I've been there. When you're involved in the crisis, unfortunately, you get blindsided by other external or important factors. You need somebody to guide you. You need somebody to be your thought partner. You need somebody who's kind of external to this type of emergency response to tell you, by the way, did you think of that? Let me do this, on behalf of you or something, so we collaborate together. But what motivates us basically is everything, like the courage that we see from our local team members, and the fact that we're coming from communities that suffered and still suffering. And finally, I guess, hope. I think hope that, our efforts will yield positive results in the future, and we're trying our best to limit the extent of these horrible situations and emergency responses, and support people to become more resilient for future shocks. Over.
Thank you both for sharing those personal reflections. It's really moving, and it just really makes me reflect on how meaningful our work is at Mercy Corps. I think it's easy for us at times to, we are professionals. This is our career, and we are experts in what we do. But also at the end of the day, our work is about people and the communities that we partner with, and that these relationships that we develop with our colleagues, with the communities where we work, like that's really what it comes down to, and where I know that so many of us find meaning and purpose in our work. So I really appreciate you both sharing those personal reflections. We have some time to turn to questions that we've been receiving from the participants on this webinar. And the first one is actually directed at Sonal, and goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, and where you mentioned using acceptance as a tool of Mercy Corps in humanitarian response. Can you share a little bit more about what that looks like in practice, just to make it a bit more tangible?
Yes, so the communities that we work in, and at least my experience has been with extremely insecure locations. And in those locations, when we're sending team members, even if it is a local team member who is from those communities, we want to make sure that they are able to do their job safely for themselves and for the people that we bring together for the services that we're offering. And to be able to do that safely, we need to make sure that the community understands exactly what purpose we are there for. So, first of all, who are we as an organization? What is the intention and the purpose that we bring to that location? Who are the people who are going to come to the community? So, almost to individual introduction besides the organization's introductions, those things are important within the community engagement. Then we also try to recruit locally. So where we have, I think there was a statistic, probably we may have missed mentioning, 84% of our team members are from the communities or the countries that we work in. And that is very, very vital, because once you start engaging with local team members, they are known in the community, that helps the acceptance that I was talking about. And the acceptance is important because we depend on communities to have the safe entry and exit for our work. We don't use armed guards, at least what I know. We do not use armed guards as organizations. We do not bring personal security along. We have to make sure that the communities are the ones who will tell us to when to come and tell us when to leave if the situation gets bad. And this acceptance strategy also extends to the local governance mechanisms, to local military, militia, sometimes wherever we can engage, because sometimes we cannot engage directly for reasons, for us being an international organization, but we work through interlocutors. So in that case, we will get feedback that this is not the right time to come in, this is the right time to be there, and also the right time to leave, not particularly for our own safety, but the safety of the program participants. So we're not gathering large communities for distributions. We are not doing trainings when the situation is really, really unsafe. So the eyes and ears on the ground, besides our professional team members, are also the communities that we work in. And that's what I call acceptance. Once we have that, then we can say that we can do a lot more than what we were expected to do. So instead of just doing activities, we do projects and programs and perhaps become partners in that development that we're talking about.
Thanks, Sonal, for explaining that in more detail. I have another question for you all, and I love this question. It's that you must get to meet so many great people in your work. And can you share a story of either a program participant or a colleague that's just really stood out to you and has really been meaningful to you?
I can jump in here, but of course I'm not gonna share because like this is about one of our colleagues, our national team members in one of the countries that I had the privilege to visit. I hope you know they cannot identify the country, anyways. So like um, that colleague. I mean, like when you see that person, they keep smiling. They keep, like they have positive energy all the time, and they encourage everyone and they support everyone. And I mean, like I had a chance and the privilege of sitting with that person and listening to their own, private story, and it was devastating because they are basically responsible to support their own family with the mom very sick, and like all other siblings are basically busy doing their own, let's say, stuff and taking care of their own needs in a very vulnerable situation. So when you see the energy and the enthusiasm that that colleague brings into the job, you would imagine that they are living a fantastic life. You wouldn't even consider that they are facing horrible living situation and condition. So this is again going back to the previous question: what motivates us when we see, I think you've spoke about this, Sanal, when you see local or national team members forgetting about their own, difficult and challenging living conditions to help and support and to honestly like even spread positivity across the whole workspace, and to encourage other team members and be there to listen to their own problems while they need support more than anybody else. I think, yeah, this adds up to the question around what motivates us. And I was like, I told that person, like, you're an inspiration to me and to everybody else. And honestly, because of the also the lack of resources that they face when they were working on developing their own skills, so they had to stay up late and basically study and have like follow a self-paced approach, which is, I mean, it's exhausting, when you see this kind of like life story. It's inspiring for all of us to continue our work and say like we're really privileged comparing to a lot of other colleagues and of course program participants and I can spend hours and hours sharing stories about great people, but again, what matters is to use the learning from that honestly life story and try our best to keep it in mind and learn to be more humble when we're serving the communities that we serve. And honestly, as I said, like Marie earlier, even when we're partnering with local partners, we need to make sure that we're using a very friendly language. Yes, we have the means, but they have the access. They are part of the community, and they are the reason why we're there. So just keep reminding ourselves that at the end of the day, we keep learning and working on ourselves as an organization. Also, not only on a personal level, but also on a professional level. Over to you.
Should I go to, or we are
Yeah,
good?
go ahead, Sonal. Yeah.
I think I emphasized quite a bit on our national team members. I think I can talk about a team which the international team members who work on different missions too, and even I think my first very amazing memory, because that was the foundation, was when I worked in Darfur. I had we were four of us in West Darfur in a place called Zalinji. All four of us were from four different continents of the world. We had somebody from Serbia, somebody from the United States, somebody from Africa, and myself from Asia. We were all four different religions. We had not, there were two women and two men, nothing in common in terms of our background or context or even the language we spoke at home, because maybe one person's maybe mother tongue was English, but none of us, the rest of us had mother tongues, our first language was not English. But the fact that when I joined the organization, I'd heard about the great team that Mercy Corps has, that kind of demonstrated on the common mission and the common path that we came together on, and we became like family. Even now, I consider them family, the four of them. I mean, the four of us basically. The work in a remote location that kind of creates a lot of intensity, working together, and the hours that Angelique was talking about, 14, 16 hours, backing each other up, looking after each other when it comes to difficult situations, whether they're emotional, whether they're physical. Sometimes you fall ill. So I can actually name one right here because she still works with Mercy Corps. Her name is Olga Jukic. She was a finance team member, then she still is a finance team member now. But she took so much interest in programs. She came with us to the field sites. She started as a national team member in Serbia, and now she's a global team member. And I am quite impressed with team members who are not just looking at their little roles when they're doing the work. They are engaged. They want to know why they're there. They're not sitting just in their office because, as a finance team member, her role was relegated to the office, but she came to the field. She saw all our programs. She participated in all the community activities. She tried to understand why she's there for, and she made a huge difference in our lives too, as housemates and teammates. So I think this is something to emphasize, not just the value that is added to my life, not just the national team members I worked with who looked after me and made sure I was safe in the country that I was in, but also the diversity of international team members that I've been able to work with in Mercy Corps, who have really enriched my life and have become part of my family.
Thank you both for this really wonderful conversation we were able to have this morning, especially as the news over the weekend was just so challenging and continues to be so challenging. It really is uplifting to hear you both reflect on your work and what motivates you, what keeps you engaged, and also just to be so clear-eyed about the challenges ahead of us, though, as an organization, as we continue to respond to more and more humanitarian crises, particularly with the effects of climate change really escalating humanitarian need around the globe. I also want to send a huge thanks to all of you who joined us for this conversation and for the support that you provide to Mercy Corps. Your flexible gifts to Mercy Corps make our humanitarian responses possible. And as we are right now mobilizing our responses in both Afghanistan and Gaza for our ongoing work in the Horn of Africa, and in Syria and Ukraine and elsewhere, having flexible support from our partners and our donors is just really critical to making us nimble and agile and able to respond quickly to these crises. So thank you so much. If you are interested in making a gift today, I encourage you to get in touch with the person who sent you the invite to this webinar. And so we really do welcome additional gifts at this time as our work just continues to grow in need. So thank you all so much. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Angelique and Sonal, for your time. We really appreciate it.